New business, Spongy Moth presentation by Forrester Collins and Director Tab.
Yeah, I just want to do some introductions and kind of preface this. This past summer, the Public Works Department was made aware of the spongy moth being in Scotswood Commons, also previously known as gypsy moth. It is an invasive species. It's responsible for defoliation. But to get any deeper into the weeds, I'll invite Forrester Collins up and Scott Shermer with the Illinois Department of Agriculture. They can speak more in depth on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. And thank you. Good to see you, President Pollock, Manager Francis, Village Trustees. I appreciate the invitation to come speak this evening. Unfortunately, not the best topic that I've ever broached with you guys. It's very unfortunate. You know, spongy moth, as Dan had alluded to, is an invasive. It was brought over from Europe and has been pretty impactful to our hardwoods and conifer forests. It's been moving westward. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but you know, it's been a challenge, and it's not the first time we've dealt with it in Riverside. So we'll get to that, but I did want to introduce Scott Shermer. He is with the Illinois Department of Agriculture. He manages their northern field office and is what I would consider to be an expert on dealing with spongy moth, gypsy moth. He's had years and years of experience, and he's really been an amazing resource for municipal foresters in the region, and myself especially. We collaborated on emerald ash borer, and you know, I'm sure we'll be collaborating on this. You know, really appreciate him coming out and giving support to the cause today, especially being away from his family this evening. So really appreciate you coming out. Generally, we're going to give a quick presentation, or as fast as we can go, because this is a pretty dynamic situation. At the end of the day, you know, I'm going to set the stage. Scott's going to come in with some expert insights, and then we'll wrap things up with some managerial options for the board to consider, and then, of course, questions and answers and all sorts of good stuff. So, as I mentioned before, try this. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So I was getting a little ahead of myself there. You know, as I mentioned, it was brought over by an amateur entomologist, essentially emphasis on the amateur. In 1869, about the same time Frederick Olmsted was walking the riverbanks of the Des Plaines. Since that time, it's slowly moved westward. It's now in Illinois, Indiana, and some southern states like the Carolinas, Tennessee. Why do we care about spongy moth? Unfortunately, it's a defoliator of trees. You can see the picture to the left there. You know, it's basically caterpillars, spongy moth caterpillars that are feeding on a linden leaf. If the population's high enough, it can completely defoliate a tree. Multiple defoliations can lead to tree mortality, and even a single defoliation, if the tree is stressed, could tip the balance on its health and cause decline. The picture to the right is actually the female spongy moth, and you can see it laying an egg mass. This was in Scotswood Common, and following this photo, it was no longer living in this world. Either which way, it has a very wide host range, different species that it feeds upon. Unfortunately, oaks are its most favored species, which is why we're finding it in Scotswood, that it's prime habitat for this invasive insect. You know, wanted to give a shout out to Christine Anderson, who lives on Scotswood. She had actually called me in the middle of July, and she said, you know, I see some spongy moths out in Scotswood. Came out and observed a fairly heavy amount of moth activity in Scotswood. You know, we did a preliminary egg mass survey, and you can see in the bottom picture there, I've highlighted in a red square where I've actually identified some egg masses throughout Scotswood Common. I have done some more surveys, like along Blooming Bank and other areas around the river. However, it's really hard to see the insect while the leaves are on the tree, especially the egg masses way high up in the top of the canopy. So there will be more surveys that will follow, and some of what we're talking about tonight is fairly preliminary until we can complete those surveys. So this is not Riverside's first rodeo with, back then it was gypsy moth. When I first got here in 2005, I did find some egg masses in Scotswood Common and Indian Gardens. Worked with the Illinois Department of Ag. I your predecessor, maybe Jim Kavanaugh at the time. And we did actually collaborate by doing trapping. Moth counts were high enough to where in 2006, we did actually work with them to spray parts of Brookfield, Lyons, and Riverside, a total of about 600 acres. And basically what was performed was 2 aerial applications of what's called BTK. It's basically a soil-borne bacterium, organic, that exists in the soil. And if you're a gardener, you've been exposed to it many times over. And then we also did a pheromone flake drop. We will talk more about that in Scott's portion of the talk. So that knocked down the population fairly significantly, and that was in 2006. 2009, I did find 2 small areas, one in Indian Gardens and another at First Avenue in Ridgewood. We did do spot sprays from the ground for those 2 because they're pretty minimal. So with that, I'm going to pass you over to Scott, and he's going to do a deep dive on the insects biology and some of the treatments that IDA has been doing in his experience. So thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Village of Riverside. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And Mike mentioned that I'm away from my family, but actually I was born and raised in Riverside, so I got to have dinner with my parents, so I'm not necessarily away from my family. But not necessarily a total deep dive, but when you talk about insects and managing insects, you have to look at their life cycle and you have to look at the vulnerabilities and where you're going to take advantage of that to control them. So this is an annual insect, and if you look in the bottom kind of right-hand corner, well, let me start up at the top. The egg masses that Mike mentioned are what we're going to see the majority of the year. They're inactive. You can't really do anything about them except scrape them off. As you rotate clockwise, bottom right-hand side, you'll see that little larva. As those larvae come out, as they hatch, the little caterpillars, they're basically feeding machines. And that short window between late April through probably mid-June is when all the damage is going to happen. So it's really a tight window there of opportunity to take advantage of that. The product that's used is they have to ingest it. And so that's where the feeding happens. The rest of the life cycle is basically inactive. The adults fly around, the males fly around, females don't. Males find the females, mate, and just make more. So really that little window of opportunity is what we're going to focus on as far as the management that Mike mentioned earlier. So the reasons to be concerned about spongy moth infestations, I'll basically just read this slide, but this is something off of, or out of Batavia from a couple years ago. It does spread easily, but it can be controlled when it's detected early and action is taken. It typically spreads through human-assisted movement, so through movement of tree debris, storm debris, firewood, even on campers and outdoor articles. It got its name Gypsy from the fact that it moved kind of in that way, and then they changed it to spongy moth out of a sensitivity initiative for common names. As Mike mentioned, the caterpillars feed on over 200 types of plants, but they do prefer oaks, so that's why it is a little bit of a challenge, is that we focus on the oaks as the major resource that's at risk. But you do have to kind of look at a bunch of other trees out there to see if you're catching everything, and that can be a challenge. Again, Mike mentioned this too, but I'll reiterate that defoliation more than 2 years in a row or multiple defoliations can put that tree into decline or mortality. But a single defoliation event usually is not fatal unless it's coupled with another infestation, a drought, some kind of abiotic factor that tree would normally be able to fend off if it wasn't being defoliated. And that was the next point, getting ahead of myself a little bit. And then the known natural controls are effective native predators. Again, this is a non-native invasive species, so nothing co-evolved with it to control it. There are some biocontrols out there that have been introduced and initiated, but being something biological, they're not really dependable. You require the appropriate conditions for those to work effectively. So again, they're not reliable. So concerns for homeowners, this is probably going to be one of the bigger things that you're going to hear about, or at least from the public. Anytime you have something attacking trees or causing damage on trees, it hits people at home, especially in Riverside. I know growing up here, the forest, the urban canopy is why people move here. One of the reasons why they move here, one of the reasons why they like the outdoor space and recreate. So you're talking about potential aesthetic damages, shade reduction, which ultimately results in increased energy usage. Noise level increases. You have some busy streets that surround this. If those forested areas were devoid of foliage, you just get additional noise coming in. And then, of course, homeowners become liable for the damage that these trees incur as far as health issues, removing the trees, potential limbs falling during storms, weather events, snow and that sort of stuff, snow accumulation. Of course, footing the bill for tree removal costs, and then additionally replacing those trees to reforest the area. This is just a pretty extreme example, pretty close to home in Riverside, or not Riverside, excuse me, Rockford. But you look at that, and all those trees in the foreground are completely devoid of foliage, and if you look in the rear, you can see all the green back there. So clearly it's not that the leaves have fallen off the tree. This was a massive defoliation event to the point that people were wrapping cellophane around the trunks of the trees in a last-ditch effort to try and prevent the caterpillars from doing damage. So shifting gears a little bit, and I know I'm moving a little quickly, but this is just an example of what we do. So this is our 2023 treatment program from this year. So at the top, you can see I think that's four treatment blocks for a total of about 3,000 acres, where we did BTK applications under the STS, or Slow the Spread program. And then below that is a lot larger set of treatment blocks and a lot larger acreage, which is done with the mating disruption by the U.S. Forest Service. So depending upon the nature of the infestation, the acreage is impacted. We do have two different techniques to approach this. When do you use aerial applications? These are a little poignant, I guess, but when you need to offset the potential ecological and financial threats to the area. So you're obviously looking at paying money to come in to control something. You're going to look at controlling it because it's going to have a negative impact or an ecological or an economic impact on the area and what's looking to be protected. Survey information indicates populations of spongy moth are growing or at high levels. We don't have that survey information here per se. But I will make a point that the fact that we went out, Mike and his staff went out, I went out and took a look today, we do have those life stages present in standing live trees, is criteria enough for us to go into a treatment or to okay a treatment on our side of things. Aerial applications are a lot more efficient and cost effective to control it, particularly earlier than later. You do have that larger area of coverage to basically get a buffer in to make sure that you do get everything. And then the options for treatment from the ground are relatively ineffective and cost prohibitive because you're treating individual trees from the ground, trying to shoot 60, 70 feet up, whereas if you're flying overhead, dropping the product, it will settle in and get full coverage. This is probably the most technical and busy slide, but it's something that's very important. And how are we doing on time, Mike? Okay. So Mike mentioned BTK, and this is a naturally occurring soil-borne bacteria that's been formulated to be used for spongy moth control. The product itself is organic. Again, it's naturally occurring. It's been used for over 50 years in organic production of fruits and vegetables and also backyard gardening. It's specific to lepidopteran, so it'll only kill caterpillars of butterflies and moths as they eat it, so it has to be ingested. It's activated in a basic or alkaline environment, which insects have. Mammals, amphibians, birds, reptiles all have acidic, so it just passes through them like a piece of gum. So it's really a neat formulation, a neat option. And if you look down below, it says the alkaline caterpillar gut triggers the BTK to release the toxin. The toxin kills the cells and basically gives them a stomach ache to the point that they won't feed anymore and they die. And then again, people, mammals, birds, reptiles all have acidic guts and they can't trigger the toxin to actually be produced, so it passes through. I just threw this one in because I think a lot of people have a little bit of misperception about what applications are and how they're done. I think a lot of people have the sense that someone maybe just goes out with a spray rig and just kind of sprays around or does something like that and doesn't pay much attention. But with these aerial applications, of course, there's a lot of human safety, environmental safety that go into it. And so this is just this isn't necessarily what would be done for the BTK application, but this is a program that's used for aerial applications called AgNav. And on the right-hand side, you can see where that treatment block is kind of blocked out. Each pilot will have their treatment block they're working on a screen, just like in our vehicles, GPS programmed and loaded in as a shapefile. And then they basically just go back and forth and paint that area. So they know when to turn on, when to turn off. They have indicators in the aircraft as well. So it's very, very, very precise equipment and operations. This is a pretty cool slide. I really like showing these because this is a before and after. So this can actually demonstrate what a bad infestation may look like, and then after the treatment comes in, if all environmental conditions line up, the treatment's done at the right time, the product is spot on, as it usually is. It's probably pretty hard to see, but if this is actually the Morton Arboretum proper from 2019, so on the left-hand side, you'll see 2019 catch with the 2020 planned treatment on top of it in that red box. I think there's like a 50, 56, 90, 80, and maybe a 170 catch in there. After the application on the right-hand side, we came in with a more intensive trapping grid, which we call a post-treatment delimit. And of all those traps in there, which looks to be about 15 or 18, we had a 4 and a 2. So we went down from about 600 moths caught in that treatment block, or in that block from the previous year to post-treatment, we caught 6. So when everything's done right and we get it right, it's very, very effective. And is this where I wanted to give it back to you, Mike? Or?
Yes.
Okay, I will pass it back to Mike.
Thank you, Scott. Sure. Appreciate all that information. So just in closing, I thought I would discuss some management options based on what we're seeing out there. And certainly this is open for discussion and Q&A. The first option would be to essentially do nothing, do some moth trapping with the IDA next year, and then we would also evaluate the levels of defoliation. The negative side of that, or the downside, would be there are risks associated with that. We could have increased tree mortality. It's not a guarantee either. Really, it depends on how stressed our urban trees are, which I know we've had some drought over the past 3 to 4 years. It's a bit of a roll of the dice. But one option is that we don't do anything and we just monitor. And to be quite frank, either way, I'm going to be monitoring. So that will happen no matter what. So another option, if you look, we could take the approach of doing a ground BTK application, very similar to what we did in 2009. As Scott mentioned, it's not as effective, and it actually costs more than the aerial application. But this would be mainly to public trees. We would be doing Scotswood and some neighboring parkway trees. One potential downside is if there are spongy moth infestations on private property, we would not be addressing those. So that total price tag, based on a current quote that I have, is approaching $13,000 for 2 BTK sprays from the ground, Scotswood and parkways, probably about half of Scotswood, essentially. And I should mention, actually, you can see at the bottom left, that was actually the ground application we did at Indian Gardens in 2009. And one thing I did kind of gloss over a little quickly, in 2006 when we had the 600 acres treated, that was actually federally funded, funneled down to the state of Illinois, so that was a free treatment. And that was because we were considered I think a quarantine area, or out on the leading edge.
It was in the STS area back at that time. Since then, it's advanced further out west and south, so you guys are now not included in that area, unfortunately. You're in what we call the monitoring area now for us, or the suppression area for control purposes.
So unfortunately, the funding wouldn't be there at the state level. And actually, I think that happened in 2009 because we had to pay for those ground sprays ourselves. So anyway, the final option or consideration would be to do the 2 aerial BTK sprays. I've kind of highlighted in the picture there, a proposed general thought on what a 25-acre application would look like. Based on some surveying and what we saw out in the field today, I may be more inclined to stretch towards the river and also pick up some of Swan Pond. We really found less egg masses towards the southern portion of Scotswood as opposed to the northern portion. So this would essentially be 2 applications that would take place in early May. First would be when the red buds flower. The other would be 2 weeks later. Generally, these applications would be done 5:30 in the morning, fairly early. And, you know, it would be an aerial spray that would total about $11,000 for both sprays. You know, and I think the idea, from my perspective, you know, in speaking with Scott, being that we're seeing all life stages out on Scottswood Common, that would be where I would lean towards, because I'm, of course, very vested and want to make sure that these trees don't get defoliated. But I certainly understand there are a lot of considerations here. There would be public notification. We would likely discuss this at the landscape advisory, and we could certainly return if that's something that's warranted or needed by the board. But with that, I think, you know, we could move on to any questions or concerns you might have.
Thank you, Forrester Collins. And Scott, thank you very much for the presentation. It's not good news, but I'm glad you brought this to our attention. Open it up for questions and comments. Trustee Mateo.
So the native caterpillars co-evolved with BTK, so what happens to them? Do they get killed off as well?
I think, you know, I can take a stab at this. You tell me if I'm right.
I'm more than happy to jump in.
No,
I get
please
this
do.
a lot.
Please
So,
do.
yeah, so, I wanted to kind of actually go back. So the reason that there are 2 BTK applications is because the product only lasts about 5 to 7 days in the environment before it gets broken down by moisture and sunlight and things like that. So the applications are made, like Mike said, about 5 to 10 days apart, depending upon ideal weather conditions. And again, that's when that real tight window of opportunity comes into play with the life stages. The dosing of the product is only effective up until the 3rd instar of the caterpillar. So if you lose that window and it gets beyond that window, it's not a strong enough dose to kill something that's that big. We need something that's about that big to be able to kill it through feeding. The positive things about this bug, I guess, are that from a forestry perspective, there aren't many native leps that are hatched in that early April time frame, or that window of opportunity for us. A lot of questions come up about monarchs and other issues. You know, this is a forest pest. We're treating forested areas, not necessarily open lands and areas where monarchs would be preferred habitat, or where their preferred habitat would be, although there is some crossover. But generally speaking, I have plenty of research and plenty of documents that indicate that there's minimal impact because of the fact that the habitats don't cross over significantly between monarchs and spongy moth. And then there's actually benefits to native lepidopteran populations, because by coming in, and even if you do have some collateral damage, you remove the spongy moth as a primary competitor for the natives. The natives have more background noise in the area, so they spill back in a lot quicker and rehabilitate that area with less competition. And then the spongy moth, typically you don't have to do a treatment again for 10 or 15 years afterwards, unless there's some kind of artificial reintroduction done. So there's a lot of work. That's a very common question and a good question, and there's a lot of work that's been done on what I would call collateral damage, and particularly monarchs.
But there are plenty of other cats that are going to be, especially in oak trees. And you're saying that given the timing, they might not hatch out until after the
Correct.
BTX is gone?
Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest benefits, or I should say advantages that we have, is just strictly the timing of the hatch. These hatch so much earlier than almost all of the natives, and the fact that the product is so short-lived, we have to apply it twice to get that window of opportunity covered over 2 weeks to get that 1st through 3rd instar. That's why we monitor hatch so closely. What's really important with this is you need about 40% leaf development to get enough product to stick to the leaves. So that's where it gets nervous for us. Yeah, is that if the hatch happens and then it gets cool and the trees slow down, the caterpillars slow down. But if you get any kind of fluctuation, the caterpillars pick up a lot faster than the trees. So we may run out of, you sometimes do have that nervous Nelly moment where those caterpillars might get a little too big and the leaves aren't quite there, but we do a very, very tight job of watching that. We talk with other states. We know when things hatch in southern Indiana, so we can kind of time things out. There's phenological indicators as well. Bridal Reed is one, and the red buds are one that we know that we can time it with. So
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you.
Trustee Escamore.
Yes, thank you. Since we're immediately adjacent to Cook County Forest Preserve property and Zoo Woods and Riverside Lawn, are there any efficiencies that could be achieved by working with the preserves, maybe doing a joint application?
So I could do some formal outreach there and get back to you on that question. I did speak with staff when I initially found it to give them a heads up that there's spongy moth here. There could be some in your preserves that, you know, are adjacent to us. So I did reach out to them, and what I was told informally, and this is at a lower level, is that generally they would not treat until they saw significant defoliation. So in terms of partnering, I'm not sure. And of course, like I said, that's an informal conversation at a lower level, but I know that they've had issues up in Park Ridge. They've had some outbreaks there where, I mean, maybe you could speak to that, but I know they had pretty significant defoliation before they were managing those.
Yeah, I don't have full details on that, but they did do some overlap in neighborhoods as well as the Forest Preserve District up along, like D Road, River Road, I believe, up in that area. But there is that opportunity to partner if the conditions. The thing is that the parameters just may be different. Like Mike said, is that your threshold may be, hey, we got them here. We see the egg masses. They're being a forest preserve. They may have a different set of criteria that maybe it's defoliation, observable defoliation. Yeah.
But that would put us at risk. That doesn't help. I don't want
No,
that.
and that's part of the problem too, is what you actually see with this bug is, and I mentioned it to Mike, is that since the females don't fly, they can't distribute that way. You can't have a gravid female fly and lay her eggs somewhere else. So they're really, when you find these infestations, they're gonna be hot and heavy on a handful of trees. That's not to say that the infestation may have come from somewhere else, but, you know, we took a quick walk around and we didn't, you know, it seemed to peter out pretty quickly. So I'm pretty confident that that's kind of the epicenter of it. How it got there, I don't know. But yeah, there is always that risk. And the bigger issue is when these little kind of outbreaks start to coalesce. But yeah, there is, I guess that's a really good point too. As I mentioned, usually 10 years to 15 years you won't have to treat again. But, you know, if one of your neighbors has it festering somewhere, it could certainly infiltrate Riverside much quicker than that. Yeah. I guess to that end, you know, I talked to our program manager, and we're happy to provide traps. I mean, I know that we haven't done the trapping, so we don't know the full extent, but we're basically, you know, basing this off of our visual, which is our criteria to do the treatment. We can certainly provide traps either post-treatment or any time. There's just you are losing that season, that window of opportunity to do the application next April, because the traps don't go out until end of July. So you're kind of taking what you got right now, hoping it doesn't get much worse, to basically maybe find out that it has gotten much worse through those traps.
Who does the application? Is it?
It's a private contractor.
Okay.
No, there's a handful of ag services that'll do these applications, and most of them are your traditional corn, soybeans, but some of them do specialize in forestry applications as well.
How do they apply it? How do they apply it? Is it with a helicopter? You said it's
Yeah,
from the
I
top.
was showing my dad video earlier. Yeah, so they fly right over the canopy, about 40 to 50 feet. They have booms that go out, and then they have what are called micronaires that are basically propellers. So the product comes through and the propeller spins and basically atomizes the product to come out and get full coverage of the foliage. And it's actually pretty neat, because you need the pitching and the yawing of the leaves to get the product to filter all the way down. Otherwise, if there was no wind, it would just kind of shell the outside of the canopy, and you wouldn't get anything on the interior. So as that helicopter comes by at low altitude, the prop wash pushes the leaves down and actually forces the product down to full coverage of the canopy. So low altitude helicopter applications, yep.
Can we ride along?
Sorry.
Definitely have a watch party.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe.
I gotta see this.
Trustee Clarity, did you have any questions or comments?
No questions or comments.
I have a question just on the aerial application. Obviously, we notify people who live and work in the area. Do they have to stay indoors? I mean, what's the What's the protocol as far as the human population?
Yep. So with this product, again, it is organic, and there's no REI or reentry interval specified. So if there is something that is highly toxic or has potential to harm humans, like you go out and spray a cornfield, there may be an REI of 12 hours, or when the product's dry. With this one, there is no concern with that. The minimal concerns that folks have are generally with like a little bit of eye and respiratory irritation, because the product is effectively an aerosol. It's a very fine mist that comes out. But we typically recommend that if folks are concerned about something like that, if maybe they have asthma or some kind of compromised immune system or something like that, just stay indoors until the aircraft are gone. I was telling Mike that a 25-acre application is probably going to take 10 or 15 minutes to do. So they'll be gone before most people are up, probably. I shouldn't say that, but 6 o'clock. If they start at 5:30, they'll be done by 6.
That's a good point.
And yeah, so most folks won't be out. You may have some dog walkers. You may have some folks out there having coffee on their decks or something. But yeah, if they're concerned about it, the recommendation would be to stay indoors. But otherwise, we've never had a corroborated medical complaint about the product, anybody having to go get medical treatment for it.
Trustee Evans?
So as far as scheduling, so do you just come up with a window of days and you just watch the environmental, characteristics of the days and try to pick the right day?
It's pretty much that scientific, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we just look at the window of when we'd like to do it, and we watch for rain, we watch for wind. This product you can't apply over 10 miles an hour, I believe. So you do have to have pretty low wind conditions. And again, that's one of the reasons why the early applications are done, because the air temperatures don't pick up until later in the day, and then you start to get swirls and inversions. That time in the morning, it's usually pretty cool. Sometimes the biggest challenge is fog and visibility. But also it's ideal conditions for applying the product. There's humidity concerns. So usually the humidity is pretty high in the morning. You don't want the product, because it comes out so fine, if there's not enough humidity in the air, it loses moisture and doesn't have its staying power. But yeah, truth be told, it's really a matter of like, hey, when do we want to treat? Okay, this week, all right, we'll start to narrow it down as the time comes.
Anything else from trustees? Anyone in the audience have any comments on this subject? Seeing none. Manager Francis.
If the board does decide that this is something they want staff to do, we would have to add this dollar amount within the budget. I know that Forrester Collins kind of estimated it to be around $11,000. If we were going to go forward with it, I would put in a buffer and put it probably at $15,000 in the capital budget, just in case he finds additional spaces that need to be treated, to allow for that flexibility, so that we don't have to come back to the board, so that we can manage it from a staff perspective.
Are you looking for direction tonight?
Yes.
Trustees?
I would be in agreement with that. I would also like another inquiry to be made to the Cook County Forest Preserves to see if there's an opportunity to partner and achieve some efficiency there.
In agreement with the aerial application?
Yes, the aerial, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll
Agree.
reach out to them tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Clarity?
I'm in favor for the aerial application. I would ask that staff be mindful that we should do some significant resident education on this. I think we have the benefit of the experts and a long presentation. I think people will need a little bit of time to get used to the idea and to understand it, and have some opportunity to ask questions, so please budget in that staff time and resources for that education campaign.
Thank you.
Can we make that PDF, that PowerPoint available?
Yeah.
I'm told it's really large, so we may have to compress it and do a couple of things, but yes, we will get it out there. And we will also, Riverside TV, I made a request that they clip this information so that there's a video that we can post, because it's great information that was provided this evening as an education campaign as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I
Staff
I
has,
told Mike that we have all kinds of FAQs and resources because we do, I mean, when we're doing our treatments, it's multi-county, multi-jurisdiction municipalities. So we do a lot of education and outreach on the front end to try and avoid concerns and issues and dare I say pushback any way that we can. So trying to get out in front of the education and outreach side of it is huge and something that we're quite involved with and happy to help with. So we're here to help.
thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Appreciate it.